I've known Lena since we were both too small to understand what friendship meant. She used to live 2 houses down from me, a girl with a stubborn streak and scraped knees, always running faster than I did, always laughing louder. Back then, she was just the girl who beat me at hide and seek and made fun of how bad I was at drawing. Life, as it does, pulled us apart and then brought us back again. Different schools, different jobs, years that slipped by unnoticed. But somehow, no matter how far we drifted, we always found our way back to each other. Now, at 40, I see her more often than anyone else. Saturday mornings sometimes, when she drops by my apartment with coffee and pastries, because you'll never buy anything fresh yourself, as she puts it. Sometimes we walk to the park and talk about things that don't really matter, movies we've seen, books she swears I should read. Other times, we don't talk much at all. We just exist in the same quiet, comfortable space. For years, it was easy. Friendship, routine, a rhythm that didn't need words. Until it wasn't. I can't say when it changed. Maybe it was one of those mornings when she stood by the kitchen window, sunlight touching her hair, and I realized how still everything felt around her. Maybe it was the way she laughed that day, not loudly but softly, with her eyes squinting just a little, the way she used to when we were kids. Or maybe I was just finally paying attention. It's strange how feelings don't arrive all at once. They grow quietly, like ivy, finding cracks in the walls you didn't know were there. The first crack appeared that evening in early spring. She came over with soup because I'd mentioned I'd caught a cold. "You need someone to keep you alive," she said, rolling her eyes when she saw the state of my kitchen. We didn't do anything special, just ate, talked, and listened to the rain against the window. But there was something in that simplicity that unsettled me. The way she leaned over to taste the soup, the sound of her spoon against the bowl, the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the smell of thyme and steam, felt like home, and that terrified me. I remember her hand brushing mine as she reached for the salt. Just a second, maybe less. But I felt it, that sudden, uninvited awareness. I told myself it meant nothing, that I was just tired, maybe sentimental. She was my friend. She'd always been my friend. Still, after she left that night, I stood in the doorway longer than usual, watching her walk away under the streetlights. Her umbrella tilted slightly to the left, as always, and I thought, when did she start walking like that? When did I start noticing? In the weeks that followed, I tried to ignore it. We kept meeting, same as always, dinners, walks, the occasional phone call late at night when she couldn't sleep. But things had shifted. Or maybe I had. I began to notice little things. How she always hummed quietly when she was thinking. How she never finished her tea. How her laughter had softened over the years but still carried that same warmth that once drew every kid on our street toward her. And she noticed things too. "You've been quieter lately," she said once, as we sat on a bench near the river. "Is work that bad? Or are you just bored with my company?" "Never bored," I said, and I meant it. She smiled, a little uncertainly, then changed the subject. But I saw the faint pink in her cheeks, the way she avoided my eyes. We didn't talk about it. We never do. That's the thing about Lena. She senses everything but doesn't push. Sometimes I wonder if she feels it too. That invisible line between friendship and something else, trembling just beneath the surface. One Sunday, she invited me to her apartment to help paint her living room. "You owe me for all the times I've rescued you from your culinary disasters," she said over the phone, and I could hear the grin in her voice. I went, of course. The room was half empty, furniture pushed against the walls, the smell of paint sharp in the air. She wore an old shirt with a tear near the shoulder and had her hair tied up in a messy knot. I don't know why that sight hit me the way it did. Maybe because it was so her, real, unpretentious. We spent the morning painting, music playing quietly from her phone. At one point, She caught me staring and threw a brush at me, leaving a white streak on my arm. "Don't look at me like that," she said, laughing. "Like what?" "Like I'm a work of art." I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Maybe you are." She rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered longer than usual. Later, when we took a break, we sat on the floor with coffee and sandwiches. The walls around us were uneven, blotchy with wet paint, but somehow the room already felt warmer. "I don't know why I bother," she said, looking at her half-finished wall. "It's never perfect." "It doesn't have to be," I said. "It's yours. That's enough." She looked at me then, really looked. Not the way you look at a friend, but the way you look when you're trying to read something written between the lines. And for a moment, everything went still. Then she laughed softly and looked away. "You always say things like that at the right time. You make it sound easy." "It isn't," I said quietly, but she didn't hear or pretended not to. That night, when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way her hair had escaped from the knot, the little smudge of paint on her cheek, the way her laughter filled that half-empty room. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, more unsettling. Like remembering a song you thought you'd forgotten, one that somehow knows you better than you know yourself. I told myself to stop, to protect what we had. But how do you unsee someone once you've really seen them? 2 weeks later, she came over again. She'd baked something, apple pie slightly burned around the edges. "I'm improving," she said, proud. "This one's only half a disaster." We ate it sitting on the floor, listening to old music, the kind we used to dance to at school parties. She teased me about my terrible rhythm. I told her she hadn't improved much either. Somewhere between laughter and silence, she leaned her head against my shoulder. It wasn't the first time, but it felt different. I didn't move, didn't breathe, really, because in that moment, I knew I was already too far gone. And yet I said nothing, because what do you say to someone who's been part of your life for 30 years? How do you tell them that suddenly, one day, friendship wasn't enough? That night, after she left, I looked around my apartment. Empty cups, 2 plates, the faint scent of cinnamon still in the air. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. I realized that love doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. It comes quietly, through shared silences, through the smell of burnt pie, through laughter that lingers longer than it should. And when it does, it asks for nothing, just to be felt. That was the beginning. The quiet kind, the kind you don't notice until it's already too late. There's a certain danger in routine, how easily it can disguise change. The same walks, the same coffee shop, the same conversations about nothing in particular. You tell yourself everything's the same because you want it to be. But beneath it all, something small shifts. A heartbeat, a glance, the way silence starts to mean more than words. With Lena, that shift was almost invisible. But I felt it. Every time she laughed, every time she looked at me like she was trying to remember something, or maybe trying not to. It was late May, the kind of day that pretends to be summer but still carries a trace of spring's cool breath. We met near the market, her bag filled with herbs and tomatoes. She said she wanted to make pasta, like in that Italian movie you never finished because you fell asleep. I laughed. "I was tired." "You're always tired," she said. "You need a hobby." "I have one," I said. "Keeping you out of trouble." She rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. That's what I loved about her. She never stayed annoyed for long. Back at her apartment, sunlight spilled across the counter as she chopped vegetables. I watched her hands, small, quick, sure of themselves. There's something intimate about cooking with someone, even if you don't say much. It's a quiet collaboration, a rhythm you fall into without realizing. "Pass me the basil," she said. I handed it to her. Our fingers brushed. Again, that stupid spark I kept trying to ignore. She must have noticed me hesitate because she looked up, eyebrow raised. You okay? Yeah. Just thinking. About what? About how you always take over my kitchen and still complain about it. She laughed, shaking her head. That's because your kitchen is a disaster zone. It was an easy moment, ordinary. And yet it stayed with me for days afterward. The sound of her voice, the smell of garlic and olive oil, the faint trail of her laughter. Later, after dinner, we sat by the window with tea. The city hummed below. Distant cars, someone playing music too loud in the next building. She leaned her chin on her hand, looking out. Do you ever think about leaving? She asked suddenly. Leaving what? The city, the noise, all of it. Sometimes, I said, but I never do. Why not? Because, I guess I wouldn't know who I am somewhere else. She nodded slowly. I used to think about moving to the coast. Somewhere small, quiet. I thought quiet would mean peace. But then I realized it's not about where you are. It's who's there with you. She didn't look at me when she said it, but I felt it, the weight of that line landing somewhere deep inside. I wanted to say something, but words felt too heavy. So we just sat there, two old friends pretending not to notice the world changing between them. A few evenings later, I got a message from her. Coffee tomorrow? I need to talk to someone who won't judge my life choices. I replied, I'm free. What did you do this time? She sent a winking emoji, and that was that. When I met her the next morning, she looked tired but radiant in that way only she could. Hair slightly messy, a loose sweater, no makeup. Just Lena. So, I said, what life choice are we justifying today? She sighed dramatically. I might have quit my job. What? Well, almost quit. I told my boss I needed time off. I'm not sure what I want anymore. There it was again, that hint of vulnerability she rarely showed. For a moment, I wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, to tell her it was okay not to have everything figured out. But I didn't. Instead, I said, you've been working there for 10 years. Maybe it's okay to pause. You've earned it. You really think so? Ido. She looked at me then, eyes soft, searching. You always say the right thing, you know that? I smiled. No, I just mean it. She didn't answer, but she kept looking. And suddenly, that silence felt full of something unspoken. That night, she called me again. Can I come over? It was past 10. I was reading half asleep, but I said yes. When she arrived, she didn't bring coffee or food this time. Just herself, quiet, a little restless. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, like she used to when she was younger. I couldn't sleep, she said. Too many thoughts. Want to talk about them? She shook her head. Not really. I just didn't want to be alone tonight. Something in her voice, soft, almost fragile, broke something in me. So I just sat beside her. No questions, no advice. Just quiet. After a while, she leaned against me. Her head found my shoulder as naturally as breathing. You're warm, she murmured, half asleep. I didn't move, didn't dare. I could feel her heartbeat against my arm, steady, familiar, terrifyingly close. And I thought, if this isn't love, then what is it? She stayed until dawn. We didn't kiss. We didn't even hold hands. But when she left, I felt as though something irreversible had happened. She turned at the door, smiled faintly, and said, thanks for being you. That's all. Simple. Ordinary. But those words carried more weight than any confession. The next few days were strange. She texted less. Our usual rhythm, the easy banter, the jokes, felt interrupted by something invisible. I wondered if she felt what I felt that night, or if I'd imagined it all. At work, I caught myself checking my phone too often, waiting for her name to light up the screen. When it didn't, I told myself I was fine. But I wasn't. It's strange how quickly absence becomes its own kind of presence. A week later, she finally called. "Hey, stranger," she said. I tried to sound casual. "I thought you joined a monastery." She laughed softly. "No, just thinking. About things." "Dangerous habit," I said. "I know." A pause. "Listen, I was wondering, do you want to get away for a few days? Just drive somewhere. No plans, no deadlines. Like we used to." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted it too much. "Sure," I said finally. "Where to?" She smiled through the phone. "We'll figure it out." That night, I lay awake thinking about what "we'll figure it out" meant. She was always like that, spontaneous, restless, the kind of person who chased meaning in motion. I, on the other hand, overthought everything. But the thought of being with her, somewhere far from the noise of our ordinary days, stirred something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement, fear, hope. Maybe this was how change began, not with grand declarations, but with a quiet invitation on a tired Thursday night. There's a certain calm that comes before change. Not the loud kind, not the one you see coming, but the stillness that settles before something shifts forever. That's what I felt the morning we left the city. Lena had chosen the direction, north toward the hills, where the air feels like it remembers things, she'd said. We didn't pack much. Just clothes for a few days, a thermos of coffee, and an old playlist from our university years. The road stretched ahead, gray and sun-washed. The city slowly dissolved behind us, its noise fading until it was only memory. For a while, we didn't speak. She leaned against the window, half smiling, hair caught by the wind. I watched her reflection in the glass, her profile softened by light, her eyes distant, as if searching for something she'd lost long ago. It struck me then how easily silence could hold so many words. Hours passed like moments. Small towns flickered by, gas stations, fields, children on bicycles. Sometimes she pointed at something outside. An old barn, a dog chasing its shadow, a tree bent almost in half by wind. Little things. But in those small gestures, I felt her aliveness, the quiet curiosity that had always set her apart. I'd forgotten how much I loved just watching her notice the world. She had a way of making the ordinary feel sacred, as if nothing was too small to be beautiful. I wondered if she knew she did that, if she realized how her presence seemed to soften even the hard edges of time. By afternoon, we reached a lake. It wasn't planned, just something she'd spotted from the road. The water shimmered under the pale sun, surrounded by pine trees and the faint smell of rain. We stopped the car, and she walked toward the shore, shoes in her hand, feet sinking into the wet sand. I followed, slower, watching her. There was something both wild and peaceful in her, a contradiction I'd never noticed before. She stood there, staring across the water as if it could answer questions she hadn't asked aloud. I wanted to go to her, to stand beside her, to say something that would make sense of everything. But words felt clumsy, too fragile to hold what I felt. So I just stayed a few steps behind and let the moment breathe. That evening, we found a small inn near the lake. 2 rooms, wooden walls that smelled of pine and dust. The kind of place where time seemed slower. We had dinner downstairs, soup, bread, a glass of wine each. The conversation was light, easy, circling around nothing important. But underneath it, I felt the same quiet pull, like a tide I couldn't resist. Afterward, she went out for a walk. I stayed in the room, lights low, listening to the muffled sound of her footsteps fading outside. When she returned, her hair was damp from mist, and her cheeks carried the cold. She smiled faintly, said she'd been thinking, then stopped herself. We said goodnight. Her room was next to mine. Thin walls, old floors, the kind that remember every sound. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of her movement behind the wall, the creak of a chair, the quiet sigh before sleep. And in that darkness, I realized something simple and terrifying. She was the person my life had been slowly turning toward all along. Not through drama, not through grand gestures, just through years of ordinary moments that somehow became everything. The next morning, fog rested over the lake like a veil. She was already outside when I woke, sitting on the pier with her knees drawn close, watching the stillness. I joined her quietly. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. There's a kind of closeness that doesn't require words, a shared silence that feels like a promise. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the gray sky. She touched its surface with her fingers, ripples spreading outward. I watched them fade, thinking of all the years between us. How every laugh, every shared morning, every half-finished sentence had led to this quiet moment. And I thought, maybe love isn't something that happens. Maybe it's something that's been there all along, waiting for you to notice. We drove back that afternoon. The city grew closer, the air heavier, the light less forgiving. Neither of us spoke much. Something had changed, though neither of us named it. When I dropped her off, she lingered for a second, her hand resting on the car door. "Thanks," she said softly, "for coming." "Always," I answered. She smiled then, a small, tired smile that carried everything unsaid. And as she walked away, I had the strange, certain feeling that this wasn't the end. Something had begun, quietly, invisibly, and it was still unfolding, somewhere beneath the surface of our ordinary days. That night, back home, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window. The city buzzed outside, unaware of the shift that had taken place inside me. The glass caught the reflection of streetlights, faint and fractured, like pieces of something just beginning to take shape. And I thought of her. The way she looked at the water, the way silence wrapped around her like a secret. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, the uncertainty didn't scare me. It felt like possibility, like the beginning of something neither of us could name yet.